Most men live like peasants, even if they wear suits, drive expensive cars, and collect paychecks from respectable jobs. Their slavery is invisible, not bound to their wrists, but etched into their thoughts. They are chained not by force, but by compliance. Long before their body bends, their mind has already bowed. Day after day, they live in quiet submission. They ask for permission to think, to dream, to take risks. They wait for a boss to reward them with progress, for a woman to crown them with validation, for society to stamp them with recognition. They obey rules written by men stronger than themselves. They worship systems they did not design. They cling to the fantasy of fairness, despite history proving it never existed. And they lower their ambitions, not because they lack vision, but because they fear the punishment of standing out. They label this cowardice as humility. But humility, when weaponized against yourself, is not virtue, it is servitude. But a king does not live this way. A king is not defined by crowns or castles. He is defined by the structure of his mind. His throne exists within his psychology. While peasants mutter, "What will they allow me to do?" the king asks, "What can I make them accept?" That question is the eternal dividing line between rulers and the ruled. The peasant mindset fears disapproval. The kingly mindset thrives on it. The peasant craves permission. The king manufactures it. The peasant lives inside boundaries. The king redraws them. This is why, century after century, the faces of power change, but the hierarchy remains the same. Most people are peasants not because they were born without power, but because they were trained to think without it. Look at the modern world. The peasant mind has simply been dressed in new clothing. He no longer kneels before a throne, but he bows before a paycheck. He no longer obeys a king's decree, but he fears the judgment of social media, the scorn of peers, and the gossip of the crowd. The prison has changed its shape, but the bars are still there. The tragedy? Most men don't even see them. Now ask yourself, what separates a king from a peasant in today's world? It is not money. Plenty of wealthy men still think like peasants, enslaved by status and terrified of losing approval. It is not appearance. A man may wear the finest suit and still tremble inside. The difference is psychological. Here are the principles of the kingly mindset. 1. The king frames reality. The peasant waits for rules to be handed down. The king creates rules through his presence. If people doubt him, he makes them adjust to his certainty. Reality bends to those who refuse to bend. 2. The king understands value. Peasants beg for validation. They lower their price just to be accepted. A king knows his value is not negotiable. His worth does not shrink because others fail to recognize it. He makes others rise to it. 3. The king is feared before he is loved. Machiavelli himself warned, "It is safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." A peasant craves affection. A king commands respect. The peasant asks, "Do they like me?" The king asks, "Do they dare to disrespect me?" 4. The king turns fairness into leverage. Peasants cling to the myth of fairness. Kings know life has never been fair and never will be. Instead of complaining, they use the imbalance to their advantage. They recognize that power, not fairness, rules the world. 5. The king is willing to be alone. A peasant fears isolation. He wants to belong. A king understands that solitude is where power is refined. Standing apart makes him untouchable. Standing with the crowd makes him disposable. This is the true reason most men will never ascend to kingship. They do not lack opportunity. They lack courage to detach from permission, fairness, and comfort. The king mindset is not easy. It requires discipline, confrontation, and the willingness to be misunderstood, but it is the only mindset that creates respect, influence, and freedom. The question is not, were you born to be a king or a peasant? The question is, do you have the courage to kill the peasant inside you? History proves this mercilessly. Alexander the Great was barely older than today's college students when he bent entire kingdoms to his will. While most men at that age were still wandering between uncertainty and comfort, Alexander carved his name into the earth with fire and steel. Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, not because it was safe, but because he understood that hesitation is death and boldness is life. To delay is to give your enemies time to crush you. To move is to force the world to bend. Napoleon crowned himself emperor in front of the watching world, rather than wait for a priest to bless him, silently declaring, "My power comes from myself, not from permission." But for every Caesar, every Alexander, every Napoleon, there were millions of men who obeyed. They marched when told to march, paid when told to pay, bowed when told to bow. They kept their heads down and lived quietly. They worked, they ate, they aged, they died, and they were forgotten before the soil covered their bodies. This is the eternal fate of the peasant. Not to be defeated spectacularly, but to vanish silently, to disappear faceless and nameless, never leaving a mark. The psychology of a peasant is humiliation disguised as civility. He waits for opportunities that never arrive because opportunities are never handed out. They are seized. He begs for love and over-explains himself in conversations, thinking that by making himself smaller, he will be accepted. He apologizes for existing too loudly, for dreaming too boldly, for wanting too much. He gives endlessly and receives crumbs, all while convincing himself this is noble. He watches others rise and tells himself it is unfair, never realizing the brutal truth. It is not unfair, it is weakness. Meanwhile, the king moves differently. He carries himself with cold detachment. He does not beg because begging is a confession of dependence. He does not chase because chasing reverses the roles of power. He does not explain because explanation dilutes authority. His presence announces him before his words are even spoken. He is desired precisely because he does not need to be desired. He is respected because he makes disrespect costly. He is feared because he has no fear of being feared. Machiavelli understood this with surgical precision. He warned that men are fickle, envious, treacherous, that they will betray when it benefits them, flatter when it serves them, and desert you when fortune turns. Power belongs not to the one who complains about this, but to the one who accepts it as a law of nature. Gravity does not anger a king, neither does betrayal. He expects it. He plans for it. He uses it. This is why kings survive where peasants collapse. The king adapts to the cruelty of human nature while the peasant denies it. Peasants cling desperately to the illusion of fairness. They cry out when wronged, believing that justice will swoop in like a savior. They demand equality from systems built on hierarchy, not realizing that fairness is a myth carefully crafted to pacify them. Kings know the truth. Fairness is not a principle, it is a weapon. It exists to keep peasants obedient, to make them believe that patience will reward them while the bold strip the world bare. The lesson is brutal but liberating. Morality bends to power. History does not remember those who played fair, it remembers those who took what others waited for. The meek do not inherit the earth, they are buried in it. Yet kings are not always loud or visible. Their greatest weapons are often silent. The difference between peasants and kings is not always measured in strength of arm or wealth of treasury, but in the discipline of restraint. A king knows that power whispered is more terrifying than power screamed. Silence is the first weapon. Silence unsettles people because it forces them to face themselves. A peasant cannot endure silence. He rushes to fill it with words, revealing his thoughts, his fears, his insecurities. But a king uses silence as a mirror, letting others expose their weakness while he remains unreadable. Silence commands patience, and patience commands respect. Absence is the second weapon. A peasant floods the world with his presence, always available, always present, always desperate to be seen. But the more present he is, the more invisible he becomes. A king withdraws strategically. He knows that absence multiplies value, sharpens curiosity, and breeds desire. His rare presence becomes a privilege, not a given. When he returns, he does not need to announce himself. The room bends toward him because absence made him heavier than presence ever could. Unpredictability is the third weapon. The peasant is predictable, his emotions erupting at the smallest provocation, his reactions easy to manipulate. But the king is unreadable. His anger is deliberate, never impulsive. His charm is strategic, never wasted. His moves are unexpected, his thoughts impenetrable, his mystery endless. This unpredictability plants fear in others. They cannot prepare for what they cannot anticipate. And fear, more than love, is what sustains loyalty. Nowhere is this contrast sharper than in the realm of desire. Peasants chase women with gifts, compliments, and constant availability. They smother, they beg, they overgive. In their desperation, they kill attraction. A king never chases. He moves slowly, deliberately, letting himself be pursued. His attention is scarce, his affection conditional, his presence rare. This scarcity electrifies desire, for people crave most what they cannot fully possess. A king becomes the center of gravity in the room, not because he shouts the loudest, but because he moves the least. His stillness is magnetic. His scarcity creates tension. Every word he speaks is weighted, not because of what he says, but because of how rarely he speaks. In a world drowning in noise, his silence becomes thunder. Scarcity is the crown of kingship. A peasant's time is cheap because he gives it to everyone. His attention is worthless because he spreads it thin. His energy is diluted because he pours it into anyone who asks. A king's time is precious because he guards it ruthlessly. His attention is valuable because he gives it sparingly. His approval feels divine because it is rare. The harder it is to access him, the more others chase. The more distant he is, the more they lean in. This principle is not limited to women. It is the essence of leadership, business, and respect. The king who controls his availability creates hunger. The peasant who makes himself common creates boredom. Scarcity is power. Abundance is weakness. The king's secret is that he knows when to disappear, when to withhold, when to restrain. The peasant never learns this. He gives, he speaks, he chases, he pleads, until he is drained of value, dismissed without memory. In the end, the difference between king and peasant is not wealth, resources, luck, or birthright. It is how one chooses to think. The peasant asks, "What can I get?" The king asks, "What will I make inevitable?" The peasant dreams of comfort, of small victories, of being noticed. The king dreams of legacy, of creating structures, of bending circumstances to his will. The peasant dies buried in excuses. The king dies with a name that history whispers for centuries. And here is the final immutable truth. The throne is not made of gold or stone. It is not a palace, nor a crown, nor the applause of the masses. It is psychological. It exists in the way you carry yourself, in the way you command silence and attention, in the way you master yourself before attempting to master others. The throne is built first in your mind. A peasant's mind is cluttered with fear, doubt, and the constant need for validation. A king's mind is a fortress, strategic, disciplined, impervious to the whims of the weak. While peasants bend to every opinion, kings bend the opinions of others to fit their design. They understand that presence, respect, and influence are earned through controlled perception, deliberate action, and psychological dominance. When you wear the crown internally, when you refuse to think like the herd, when you act with sovereignty even in mundane matters, the world bends before you without resistance. People obey before you speak because your internal throne radiates authority. They notice your absence, they respect your decisions, they feel the weight of your presence. History is full of men who held kingdoms without lifting armies, and men who wore crowns only to find their power hollow. The difference was never gold, only mind. The throne isn't built of gold or stone. It is built in your mind, in your daily decisions, in your self-mastery, and in the quiet confidence that you do not need permission to exist or to command. Wear the crown there first, and the world will kneel long before you even demand it. And remember this: kings are not made by circumstance. They are made by thought. They are forged in silence, absence, restraint, and deliberate action. If you can think like a king, you can act like a king. And if you act like a king, no one, not wealth, not fear, not envy, can prevent you from claiming the throne that exists first within your mind.